The first relatively reliable facts about the biography of the writer, mystic, and ethnographer Carlos Castaneda pertain to the time when he published his first book. Before that, everything is shrouded in fog. Who he was, where he came from, how old he was, and what his real name was, all of this remains highly questionable. There are many versions of his biography, none of which can claim absolute authenticity. In this video, we will try to understand who Carlos Castaneda was, analyze his main works, and explore the warrior's path. Here is Castaneda's own version of his origins. Little Carlos was born on Christmas Day, 1935, in the Brazilian city of São Paulo. His father was 17 and his mother was 15, so he was immediately given to his grandparents, who lived on a farm, to be raised. At the age of 6, his now grown parents took him back, but a year later, his mother died of pneumonia. The boy was once again taken in by relatives. He received an education at a good school in Buenos Aires, and in his teenage years he was sent by his uncle and aunt to a foster family in Los Angeles, where he successfully completed high school. He then tried to become a sculptor at the Academy of Fine Arts in Milan, but realizing he would never be a great artist, he fell into depression, returned to Los Angeles, and enrolled in the social psychology department at UCLA. There, in 1953, he changed his surname to Castaneda, later switched to an anthropology course, and became so fascinated by it that his thesis, printed by the University of California Press, became one of the most popular books of the early 1970s. Another version, based on documents, claims that Castaneda did indeed arrive in America in 1951, but he was 26 years old, not 16 as he claimed. Immigration records show that Carlos Cesar Arana Castaneda was actually Peruvian and was born in the ancient Inca city of Cajamarca. His mother did die, but when Carlos was 24, not 6. He studied sculpture not in Milan, but at the National School of Fine Arts in Peru. His classmates described him as a witty fantasist, a master of gambling, a great liar, and a good friend. Among the documented evidence of his life are, for example, letters to his cousin, which suggest that he served in the U.S. Army but was forced to leave due to either an injury or a nervous breakdown. Castaneda's first book, The Teachings of Don Juan, was published in 1968 and immediately became a bestseller. The late 1960s and early 1970s were a time of the rise of psychedelic culture. Chemists were testing new drugs, and scientists were conducting experiments on the psyche of soldiers returning from Vietnam. Trips, descriptions of visions, hallucinations, and their accompanying sensations were everywhere, often amounting to primitive, incoherent ramblings from the mind of yet another hippie. Why did the teachings of Don Juan, largely a report of the trips Castaneda experienced, stand out from the crowd and become a Bible for hundreds of thousands of young people? The answer lies in the title itself. The psychedelic experiences were part of a system in which Carlos was gradually initiated by an enlightened old Indian, Don Juan, who didn't just invent a fairy tale but presented a coherent system rooted deep in ancient times. Castaneda's books filled the niche of the lost esoteric knowledge of the Indians, whom white rationalists with guns and muskets had nearly wiped out. The second book, A Separate Reality, was published in 1971, followed a year later by the third, Journey to Ixtlan. In addition to commercial success and near-folk fame, Journey to Ixtlan earned Castaneda a Doctor of Philosophy, awarded by his senior colleagues at UCLA. His popularity interfered with his teaching activities because, as he said, lecture halls were packed to the brim and the audience expected only one thing from him: that he would crack and deliver a revelation, or at least give a good shake to their assemblage point. Hollywood producers began hounding Castaneda about adapting his books into films, but he consistently refused, saying he didn't want Don Juan to be played by someone like Anthony Quinn. In 1973, he appeared on the cover of Time magazine and gave its correspondent the only public interview of his life, after which he vanished from the public eye and lived as a recluse, publishing 10 more books. He briefly reappeared in public only near the end of his life. The core of his philosophical system lies in his third and fourth books, Journey to Ixtlan and Tales of Power. The other books merely complement and expand on what is said in them. Castaneda's biography is murky because he made every conceivable effort to remain an enigma to us. We can only judge his life and discoveries through his books, which claim documentary authenticity. This very authenticity drove hordes of scholars and debunkers mad. Is Don Juan real? Does Castaneda truly convey the teachings of the Indians? Or is it all a synthetic philosophy cobbled together from everything he read and heard, with the shamanic trappings merely an artistic device? His colleagues at UCLA insisted that his books described real and even scientific experiences worthy of a professorship. Castaneda explained their documentary accuracy by saying he constantly took notes in a notebook, even during conversations with Don Juan, and later meticulously refined them. While working on his first book, Castaneda consulted with his academic advisor, who made him rewrite the book almost entirely 3 times. The first rewrite was because Castaneda dwelled too much on his visions, which were of no interest to anyone. The second time, the professor criticized Carlos for trying to philosophically comprehend and explain Don Juan, and urged him to remain impartial. As a result, Castaneda's books read like an impartial report from parallel worlds. If his books are truly documentary, then Castaneda is a genius anthropologist who unearthed an intact system of a nearly vanished culture. If his books are fiction, then we have before us a genius writer who created a captivating world and a cohesive philosophical system. Carlos Castaneda's encounter with Don Juan Matus took place in 1960 at a bus stop in Arizona near the Mexican border. A young anthropologist writing his thesis had come there in search of indigenous folk healers who could tell him about the magical properties of plants. A friend introduced him to an old Indian who had a local reputation as a brujo, a sorcerer, healer, and shaman with eccentric behavior and a strange sense of humor. Their meeting led to Castaneda becoming a student and successor of a magical tradition. For 13 years, he consciously and unconsciously absorbed knowledge, underwent intense psychological training, performed numerous exercises and tasks, reorganized his life, erased his personal history, and jumped into an abyss. Before I met Don Juan, I spent years sharpening pencils and suffered terrible headaches every time I sat down to write. Don Juan made me realize how foolish that was. If you want to do something, do it impeccably. That's all that matters. Castaneda's books describe one of the most fascinating examples of a teacher-student relationship. Don Juan is never satisfied with verbal explanations. A simple demonstration is not enough for him either. A lesson is complete only when the student has gone through trials and gained a transformative experience. The methods of this Indian guru have much in common with Japanese Zen masters. The teacher confronts the student with a direct experience. Instead of persuading the student with words, the teacher hits him on the head with a stick, interrupting the student's fruitless musings with a collision with pure reality. Don Juan's authority in Castaneda's eyes, as well as in the eyes of millions of readers, rests on the fact that Don Juan has impeccable control over his body, emotions, attention, and the entire situation around him. It's impossible to catch him off guard or corner him with a question. He emerges victorious in almost every debate, and he does so effortlessly, primarily because he argues impartially, defends nothing, and is master of every topic discussed. In contrast, Castaneda seems like a nervous boy. He takes offense at every turn, for which Don Juan invariably mocks him, making him even angrier. The training took place in sessions. Castaneda would visit his teacher in the Sonoran Desert for a few weeks, then return to Los Angeles, spending months processing what he had experienced, trying to follow instructions and live like a warrior. In the dialogues between a Western materialist and an Indian mystic, 2 worldviews clashed. At the beginning of their acquaintance, Castaneda looked down on the old Indian. He was a young, enlightened scientist, a skeptic and rationalist to the core, encountering an uneducated villager whom he intended to study almost like a lab rat. However, over time, Carlos realized that his new friend, though ignorant of Hollywood stars or the latest scientific terms, could manipulate him as he pleased. Don Juan's teaching style is reminiscent of David Fincher's The Game or Guy Ritchie's Revolver. In all three cases, the protagonists are placed in a pre-constructed labyrinth and forced to endure a series of painful trials so that they can ultimately rethink their lives and emerge as new people. In the first two books, the novice Castaneda refuses to abandon his university habit of rational thinking due to his overly inflated ego. He is unable to grasp Don Juan's teachings. As a last resort, Don Juan gives him psychedelics to at least shake or shatter his established worldview in an altered state. This led to the mistaken belief that Castaneda's books are built on a solid foundation of drug trips. This misconception caused many seekers of quick solutions to fall on the battlefield of awareness after reading the first two volumes. However, as soon as Castaneda embarks on the warrior's path, drug use ceases and rigorous practice begins, along with grappling with the ever-new wisdoms of the old Indian. It's also incorrect to compare Castaneda to Timothy Leary, as the warrior's path lies in a particularly sober attitude toward the world, not in observing the effects of hallucinogens. Incidentally, Castaneda, who not only disapproved of drugs but also abstained from alcohol and smoking, places himself on the opposite side of the psychedelic divide from Leary. They were children indulging in incoherent revelations. A sorcerer uses hallucinogens for different reasons than addicts. And when he gets what he wants, he stops taking them, Carlos said about his encounter with Leary's crowd. Perhaps Castaneda used this psychedelic bait to make his spiritual teachings a bestseller. In any case, the first two volumes can be seen as a defense against fools. A superficial mind, craving tangible results without effort, latches onto drug advocacy as a panacea, while a thoughtful reader who grasps Don Juan's system will see that it's entirely unimportant. At the height of Castaneda's popularity, Mexicans began actively searching for the real Don Juan. On this wave, American tourists flooded the country, and numerous charlatans emerged, posing as the legendary Yaqui Indian. Mexicans started organizing gatherings of Don Juan seekers, while local entrepreneurs renamed their diners and motels things like Brujo Barbecue and Mezcalito Motel. Attempts to find Don Juan failed completely, which could mean one of two things. Either this Indian never existed, or he was a damn clever old sorcerer. Since Castaneda himself became a recluse at the peak of his fame, we know almost nothing about his real life. Thus, it's hard to judge how closely he followed the instructions given by his teacher. Without the ability to evaluate the teachings through the person who professed them, we curious and desperate souls are left to test Don Juan's postulates on ourselves and share our impressions. Understanding it requires more than reading a dry dictionary entry, but it can be summarized by reducing it to practical techniques aimed at one goal: awareness. A person's level of awareness is the amount of information from the external and internal worlds that their consciousness can process at a given moment. David Hawkins, advocating for expansion through meditation, offers an interesting analogy between consciousness and a ball. If your consciousness is the size of a golf ball, your world is the size of a golf ball. When you expand your consciousness to the size of a volleyball, the world grows with it, and so on. Don Juan's exercises help gain control over oneself and one's life. Finally, open one's eyes, see the myriad possibilities in the world, and learn to read its signs. Warrior is a key concept in Don Juan's teachings, quite traditional for some other spiritual doctrines. However, unlike the samurai code, with which Castaneda is sometimes mistakenly compared, Don Juan's warrior path implies neither killing living beings nor loyal service to a master. This concept refers not to ordinary human warfare, but to a spiritual struggle with oneself and one's internal obstacles. The state of a warrior is complete awakeness and unconditional resolve. For a warrior, The world is a mystery they seek to unravel with curiosity and awe. The warrior's path is Don Juan's system. Broadly speaking, it boils down to fully dedicating oneself to what one is doing in the present moment, acting decisively if one has decided to act, not regretting the past, not fixating on the future, and living each moment with the passion and detachment of someone who knows their life could end at any moment. Don Juan's teachings are entirely geared toward evolutionary growth. An ordinary person, living haphazardly, accepting their flaws as a given and their life as a sentence, moves in the opposite direction from that chosen by a warrior. Such a person feels powerless over circumstances, becoming their victim. They see injustice everywhere, and all sorts of vicious and weak people prevent them from living peacefully. A warrior, on the contrary, takes an active stance toward themselves and the world. Those who want to do something devise a strategy. Those who don't want to do anything look for excuses. For a warrior, the world offers clues for action. They perceive any life successes or failures as challenges, invitations to prove themselves. No one grades them, pays them extra, or praises them. Solely by their own desire and conviction, they give 100% in all their endeavors. Don Juan says, an ordinary person thinks they'll live forever, so they have an unlimited amount of time to make mistakes, slack off, and do things they don't really care about. However, every person can realize their mortality, understand that everything ends sooner or later and time is short. So you must do only what's most important. Does the realization that you can't do everything plunge you into despair? Don't rush to give up. Don Juan explains that the true consolation for a mortal lies not in how much they accomplish, but in how impeccably they pursue their goals and what kind of path those goals create. Are you satisfied with what you're doing? Are you sure this is what you need to be doing right now? Think about it. How would you live if you had, say, 3 years left? Would you live the way you do now? Would you worry about how you appear to others? The sense of your own exceptionalism makes you think that the trials you face are pure torment, that your sins deserve particularly harsh punishments in hell. If you're bad, you're the worst. Minimal achievements are immediately inflated. It feels like just a bit more, and you can already canonize yourself as a saint, or at least an unrecognized genius. When trials come your way, the first thing you do is wail, "Why me?" instead of seeing them as another challenge and not attaching special significance to them. A person who doesn't know they're just a speck in this world, no better or worse than other specks, whose life will pass just as quickly as any other. Thinking of yourself as a very important person, or rather a unique speck, means that everything that happens to you is extraordinarily significant. All your experiences and sensations deserve the closest attention. All your thoughts are of great importance. The sense of self-importance exists in all of us, like childish egoism or a kind of crude solipsism. It forms what can be called the ego. It seems impossible to get rid of it because it feels like me, but in reality it's not me, but my sore spot. It's precisely because of the sense of self-importance that I can be offended or insulted and thus made weak. Personal history constantly needs to be preserved and updated. That's why you tell all your friends and acquaintances about everything you do. For a warrior who has no personal history, there's no need for explanations. Their actions can't anger or disappoint anyone. Most importantly, they're not bound by anyone's thoughts or expectations. Personal history is a set of ideas about yourself, your personality, and your life that largely determine your future actions. Personal history includes not only your own knowledge of yourself, but also others' knowledge of you. Sometimes others' expectations define you even more than you define yourself. And sometimes your actions start to be dictated by a fictional image you created for protection, but something went wrong. To erase personal history, a person must analyze it, revisiting all the significant and defining events, and disentangle themselves from their traumas and everything else. A warrior has nothing to defend because they know that nothing in life truly belongs to them. Thus, a warrior is never besieged or cornered. Human life consists of beliefs, habits, strengths and weaknesses, experiences, memories, body, and consciousness. Don Juan calls for a total inventory of one's personality down to the smallest details. What are you made of? Become aware of every detail of your daily life, your moods, and your desires, breaking yourself down into components. You must discard everything unnecessary, reassemble yourself, and emphasize your strengths. Physical tone, emotional structure, energy level, mental speed, and liveliness. All these are parts of the personal equation that in Castaneda's system is called the tonal. Working on the tonal is similar in principle to working on the body, but isn't limited to it. Just as you can strengthen your hips with squats, you can develop the tonal by performing everyday tasks in an impeccable state of mind, responding to the world's challenges, following its signs, and setting goals while relentlessly pursuing them. Training the tonal resembles tempering the will, as well as everything we've seen in movies about Shaolin monks. The internal dialogue is literally all the thoughts you vocalize in your head. Part of the internal dialogue becomes the words you speak aloud. In this conversation, a split occurs. Instead of stating what you want, you start talking and even arguing with yourself, trying to figure out what you really want. In such a system, an excess of thoughts and their false direction prevent the mind from working properly. Most of the time, the mind follows well-trodden paths and repeats the same patterns. Stopping the internal dialogue allows you to pause, look around, and precisely determine where you need to go. To understand what the internal dialogue is, try focusing on the second hand of a clock and attempt to think of nothing but the hand. After 30 seconds, you might find that your thoughts have wandered far. How do I look from the outside? What's my neighbor thinking? What tasks need to be done? What should I have said back then? And so on. To think effectively, you must learn to turn off mental noise, clear your head, and focus solely on what you're concentrating on. This is the art of spontaneous, illogical interaction. The external manifestation of controlled folly looks like spontaneous immersion in the banality of what's happening, but internally, the warrior remains neutral. A warrior is free from assigning importance to themselves or things and free from denying importance. They are free from attachment and detachment. They treat affirmation and negation with equal impartiality. Nothing holds special significance, so a warrior simply chooses an action and performs it, but does so as if it matters. Their controlled folly makes them say that these actions are very important and act accordingly. At the same time, they perfectly understand that none of it matters. Thus, when they stop acting, the warrior returns to a state of calm and balance. Whether their action was good or bad, whether it succeeded or not, is of no concern to them. The point is that a warrior is oriented toward interacting with the emanations of the universe. They are untouched by infinite folly. They grasp the infinite mystery. The things people do can never, under any circumstances, be more important than the world. Thus, a warrior treats the world as an infinite mystery and what people do as infinite folly. Power is the universal currency of Don Juan's world. It's not physical strength, though that's part of it, but a sense of possibility and a kind of harmony with the world, which seems to guide and help you rather than oppose you. A warrior is someone who understands the power dynamics of the world and knows how to handle power correctly. They know which actions and states are filled with power and can thus accumulate it. Jedi talk about a similar kind of force, by the way. Daily life is filled with challenges for a warrior. A challenge is a potential opportunity to increase one's power through an impeccable action. There are countless opportunities around. Any action performed impeccably, with warrior-like detachment, without attachment to results, and with awareness of imminent death, is an impeccable action that raises one's level of personal power. Don Juan believed that all our efforts are ultimately futile because we will all die sooner or later. But we have a life to live, and it's better to live it impeccably, with a sense of satisfaction from having given your all to what you did. Life is filled with choices, all of them different, but all inevitably leading to death. Therefore, in essence, they're all the same, except for one thing. Every warrior has their own path with heart, meaning a path with purpose. Following a path with heart is joyful and easy, even if it's full of difficulties and leads nowhere. Thus, a warrior trusts their heart to choose their path, and once chosen, does not stray from it. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to like it, write in the comments what you think of Carlos Castaneda and when we'll start walking the warrior's path.